right, everybody, welcome to the Somewhat Podcast, men. Today, we're going to have an excellent show for you guys. It's going to be about economic imperialism. And if you guys are confused about what that is, stay tuned and listen. Our guest today has over 3 years of minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour study, research, and dedication to this topic. Our honored guest today is Bibi. Welcome aboard, Bibi. My name is Alex. Going to Riz.
And this is Riz K. Welcome, you beautiful, smart, intelligent. Well, enough about me. No, I'm just kidding.
Hell yeah.
No, we love you, listeners. We're glad you're tuned in. We've got a really good show for you. Our friend Habibi has got a lot of research, a lot of experience on this topic. It's a very important topic. It's a topic that you really need to understand. And Saint, go for it.
Well, Riz, that's kind of putting up the steel wall, and it felt pretty strong there, So this topic basically goes in hand with the foreign policy of the United States we were talking about on our last show. And I think this will open up where we were just trying to mitigate as much as we can in that show, but I think this will kind of specify and focus on a lot of key things we really wanted to talk about. Riz.
Yeah, so Habibi, so before you start talking about the nuances of imperialism and all those fancy big words, why don't you maybe tell the listeners, like, why should they bother? Why should they care to know more about this topic? What do you think?
That's a great question, and as you guys have seen, some might call me Bibi, the Arabs call me Habibi, but either way I can explain to you imperialism. Imperialism is obviously an extremely important topic with relation to current economics, because when you understand imperialism, you can see why the global economy functions the way it does function. Rather than looking at the world and thinking, oh, things are just the production of random occurrences of economic trade and whatnot, you can see a systemic relation of imperialism with regards to dominant capitalist societies and the imperial peripheries, as well as the imperial core's rivals. And I'm going to be explaining that today in detail.
So now, just to clarify for our listeners, so when you're talking about imperialism, you're defining it as like a country's desire or to expand beyond its borders, either in different ways, or what do you mean by imperialism?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I can get into the definition of imperialism now.
Okay.
So I'm going to specifically credit Jay Stratfor. He is an Australian economist who's created a great PhD thesis that I think everyone should check out. Essentially, what you guys want to do here is when you research the topic of imperialism, specifically with regards to economics, there's two main bodies of work that you read about, right? I believe in 1903, a man by the name of John Hobson, he came out with the book called Imperialism, a Study, right? 1917, Lenin draws from Hobson's work and creates Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, right? And nowadays, that's where you get a lot of the current understanding of imperialism, right? Lenin's model draws from Hobson's, right? And this is what we're going to be talking about a lot today. Hobson specifically denied the drain of wealth from India to Britain during British colonial rule. And that's what I believe results in a lot of mistakes with today's understanding of imperialism, right?
Wait, he denied?
Yeah, and I'll bring you a direct quote from him, which is really interesting, right? So
really?
Yeah. So a direct quote from Hobson. He states in his book that I mentioned in 1903, right? He said that India actually, quote unquote, marginally benefited India, right? The trade, right? The British colonial rule marginally benefited India by, quote unquote, checking the corruption and tyranny of native princes.
Oh, I actually would agree with him on that. I would actually agree with him on that.
It's more that gets into it, right? And it introduced a public system of schools and colleges by teaching the Christian religion, industrial arts, building roads and railways, and by also having reduced the burden of taxation.
But Habibi, don't you think philosophically that almost sounds like that it's a paternalistic type of
it's the Rudyard,
right?
yeah, it's the Rudyard Kipling poem of the white man's burden.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Exactly.
But I will say this, right? There are some people that say that poem is in jest. That it's supposed to be I forgot the word.
A satire.
My brain doesn't work. Yeah, it's supposed to be
Oh, yeah.
satirical. Yeah, thank you.
So Lenin in 1917, right? He defines imperialism in chapter 7 of his book in essentially 5 points. But rather than like listing out all 5 points, I'm just going to summarize to you. It's essentially known as like national monopolization, the stage of imperialism, and then the export of capital to foreign markets, which results in internationalist, monopolist, capitalist associations. And I know that's a lot of big words, but essentially what he says is that export of capital is a defining feature of imperialism. This doesn't show the idea of national exploitation, right? It only shows class exploitation, which is a model in and of itself, right? The model of class exploitation assumes like a closed economy in which workers' wages and capitalist profits are denominated within the same currency. But that's not how it functions in the real world, right? The real world has multiple countries, multiple denominations of currencies, exchange rates that need to be maintained, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And because Lenin draws from Hobson, who didn't accept the drain of wealth, which is what we can look to as a fact at this point, right? We're going to be looking at the Patnaiks, who are a group of economists in India who do accept the drain of wealth from India to Britain, right? And
So
What
real
are their names? I'm sorry, Patnaik? How do you spell that?
last name Patnaik, Patnaik.
Okay.
And also for somebody who might not understand, what does drain of wealth mean?
That's what I can get into right now. So during British rule from 1765 until 1938, right? These Patnaiks, husband and wife, a group of economists, they estimate a one-way drain of wealth, right? A one-way drain of wealth within this 173-year period in excess of 44.6 trillion US dollars. This is 2018 US dollars, right? Some
So
people
with inflation is 580, right?
Exactly, pretty much, yeah. Good math right there. So, and that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. Sorry, yeah, Saint, go ahead.
No, so we all know. I mean, let me just kind of specify. Like when we were talking about wealth, they took all the jewels, the gold from the ancient architecture that was there. The Rajas and the Mughals, their treasures. We're talking hard currency here.
Exactly.
So like what we're talking about right now, what Habibi's talking about right now is the British colonized India over a certain amount of time, and during that time they drained the wealth of India. So through unfair trade deals or through more things that Habibi's going to be talking about, they took the wealth of India and brought it to the United Kingdom. Is that correct?
And what they did with the money is what I'm also going to be going into today, which is extremely important with how current economies work.
It's funny. He said that they colonized. I just wanted to say they tried to colonize
India.
Yeah, they tried. They could only hold it for so long because
was it a protectorate for 300
No,
years?
yeah, because they still gave power to some of the important people. Yeah. Because there was too many.
They made it part of the Commonwealth.
Yes. Well, no, not really. Commonwealth.
I thought India was part of the Commonwealth. That's how Indian nationals were
Well,
able to
not
travel
like the other Commonwealth territories there.
No, but that was just
This was on paper.
cultural practices. Yeah.
This is for the sake of just saying it and nothing practical about it. But then we learn how to play cricket, and then it's history from there.
Then Lagan came about.
And we drink tea, play cricket. There are some good things about British rule.
Didn't we drink tea prior to that? I thought we drank tea prior to that. Or maybe we were drinking lassi.
Yeah, but I don't think we drank tea like 3 times a day, and it was like a formal ritual and all.
I don't think the Brits drink tea like we do over there.
I
Yeah,
think
we
they
took-
do. Yeah, they for sure they do.
All right, let's move from
yeah?
this Tea Party.
Okay.
All right.
Next on a somewhat podcast, men T.
and cricket.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
What's cricket?
Okay, that bat game, right? You would know.
That's where baseball originated from.
Oh, don't
That's
start,
a cool
bro.
version of baseball.
I'm gonna have to call Puerto Rican.
I agree, man. Cricket over baseball any day. But Habibi, you were mentioning that this wealth that the British were able to, drain from India. So what they did with it, you think is a more interesting and more pertinent to current day. So what do you mean by that?
So we're going to be getting into that shortly, right? So
Okay.
we can define imperialism now, rather not
Yeah.
the export of capital specifically, right? Because if we
Okay.
were to just like boil it down to that, that wouldn't really tell us why imperialism functions in today's world, right? So rather, you can say imperialism consists, and this is a direct quote from Jay, quote unquote, consists of the hegemon trying to maintain the value of its currency by freezing the global core periphery relations that it inherited from the preceding hegemon by any means necessary. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about
Yeah,
hegemon.
that's the lava right there. What he just said. That is the core. All right? Maintaining the hegemony with whatever means necessary.
Exactly. And go ahead.
I'm sorry. We should probably define hegemon for the viewers because that's a pretty.
I think the petrodollar would be the good way to go about that.
We're talking about the petrodollar today as well. I'm definitely going to be getting into that.
But a hegemon is basically like an entity that is dominating.
The dominant,
Yeah, that has a monopoly
The
over.
dominant,
they're
Has a
Controlling
monopoly,
interest or a controlling country.
monopolizing
Right.
because everybody's played Monopoly.
Okay. I never liked Monopoly, but anyway.
I hated
So,
it.
so Habibi, the hegemony controls the what?
Oh, sorry, that was a question for me.
Their interests.
Yeah, they're trying to maintain specifically the value of their currency,
Currency.
increasing the global relations that are taking place. Yep. And I'll get into a big explanation over this model that I'm going to be talking about, right? This model is titled the Hegemon Rival dialectic, right? Which stems directly from the Putnamite economists, right? And you can surmise from their works. What does this mean? It means essentially the hegemon wants to stay the hegemon. It wants to have the dominant world reserve currency. Right. It wants to extract cheap labor, resources, wealth from its rivals, and especially the peripheries in the third world. That's where a lot of, essentially, not slave labor in direct terms, but you can think of it as nowadays slave labor with the amount that we're paying these guys, right?
And would you say that the hegemon in our world since after World War II has been the United States?
Oh, 100%.
Pretty much, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll definitely get into that for sure.
Okay.
So the hegemon rival dialectic, let's speak about this in historical terms so I can talk about this like cyclical systemic nature of how imperialism functions, right?
Okay.
So during British colonial rule, Britain, being the hegemon here, is the country with the hegemonic world reserve currency, right? The British pound is backed by the gold standard, et cetera, et cetera. And they have their own mercantile rivals. In Britain's case, they were their own settler colony nations, right? It was the US, it was Canada, Australia, South Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And then there were extractive peripheries, India specifically, right? So there's the hegemon, there are the rivals, and then there's the peripheries, right? How did this work in practice, right? As I mentioned to you, the $44.6 trillion figure, that was the drain of wealth from India to Britain during colonial rule, right? What would they do with this wealth? That's what I was speaking about earlier, right? They didn't just reinvest this back into India and then speed up the industrialization process for these guys, right? These guys in India had their labor, resources, wealth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, stolen from them in essence, right? Mm-hmm. And modern calculations show that an estimate of 81% of these British capital exports went directly to these settler colony nations, US, Canada, Australia. And that plays a big part as to why these countries are first world as they are today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because why is this model so interesting, this hegemon rival dialectic, right? You have the hegemon, Britain, you have the rivals, settler colonies being America, Canada, et cetera, and then you have the extractive peripheries. Why is this interesting? It's interesting because there's this inherent contradiction in place, right? Because as the hegemon exports the capital to these settler colonies, you can talk about them as like mercantile rivals. They begin to industrialize. You can see the effects of the today, right? And in essence, the hegemon deindustrializes, right? Why would they want to keep all this industry in place in their own country domestically and pay their workers so much money when they can just get it so much cheaper from these other, like, mercantile rival countries, right? It's just, free market economics working as free market economics.
I'm going to pause you right there, and this because that is a very, very important point right there.
Yeah.
The industry in the United States, we were talking about that. Remember?
Yeah, we were.
You can see why it's not here anymore. I just want the listeners to kind of just focus on that point.
Yeah, I mean, from what Habibi's saying is that the interest, the powered interest or the moneyed interest, want to move industry out of the United States or have successfully moved industry out of the United States in order to keep wages low. Like if somebody's building something, manufacturing something sustainable, they have to be paid a decent salary. So let's ship that out somewhere else, and we can we can move our economy into a service economy.
Exactly. And now that's why you see all this revolt. And that, I mean, you can actually directly tie in the 2016 election with how Trump got elected and the way that he spoke to like the working masses with that deindustrialization process that took place after U.S. Took hegemony after Britain post World War II. And I'll get into that as well.
So I don't want you to lose focus here. So the hegemonic country exports industry to their rivals and took from their client states. They sent the wealth. They extracted the wealth from the client state and sent it to their rival states. So like basically what you're saying is that the British invested in the United States when it was a colony, in the American colonies and the Canadian colonies and the Canadian Commonwealth and the Australian and South African Commonwealths. They took that money from India and reinvested that money into those countries in order to build them up. Okay.
In exchange for, and these guys, U.S., South Africa, et cetera, they were producing goods in exchange for the hegemonic currency at the time, which was the British pound.
So why didn't the British introduce industrialization into India and instead take the industrial manufacturing goods from India?
They have their own interests in mind, right? They are also exporting not just capital, but also people to these settler colonies. These are settler colony states, right? So it's their own people in essence, right? They want their own people to do good, right? Why? It's in their own best interest.
Yeah, I don't think they could have populated India. There's just too many of them. There weren't enough Brits, literally.
Yeah, I don't think the British Kingdom expected the colonies to revolt either. So especially that part of the world has a very strong cultural aspect, which they were fighting also. You got to remember that. Well, I was talking about the American colonies, so they were investing heavily into
American colonies. That's why, the native Indians, didn't put too much of a fight. Plus, I don't think they were on the level of the civilization that India had at that time.
I think the Native Americans at that point were more allied with the British against the American colonialists. The British had made a lot of promises to them in terms of land and resources, because just to Habibi's point, the U.S. colony was to remain an industrial core. So why would they let their colonialists expand further when all they needed to do is focus on industry? So Habibi,
but not to get off the topic, because we could definitely drift to different tangents. But Habibi, going back to the point you made, I want to drill down on that actually, because I think it's a very, very interesting and important point. So the United States has been the hegemon of the world after World War II, correct? And the dollar has been the world's reserve currency since approximately then.
1944.
Since when?
1944.
Okay, so now if let's try to do like draw like parallels, similarities, and differences between the British as a hegemon and the United States as a hegemon, because I think that would be very fruitful. So when the British were the hegemon, the pound was the world's reserve currency. When the United States has been a hegemon, the dollar has been the reserve currency. At the British time, they actually physically occupied their colonies in terms of their imperialistic adventures. The United States doesn't do that. I think they do it through other means. So let's maybe talk about that a little bit.
That would be IMF.
Post-colonial policies, which is a super important point. Yeah. So, stemming from what you just said, right? So post-1944, the U.S. takes over hegemonic currency
right.
after Britain in 1944, right? As a result of its industrial supremacy at the time, right?
Right.
But this is post-colonial time, right? Why is this post-colonial? How did America take over this hegemonic status from Britain?
Yeah.
So FDR in 1946, right? He demands from Winston Churchill at the time, and this is a direct quote from FDR. He demands that, quote unquote, one of the preconditions of any lasting peace will have to be the greatest possible freedom of trade. That is, no artificial barriers blocking U.S. entry into the markets of Britain's periphery colonies. So, this is not some noble thing from FDR, right? He's not bringing freedom to all the colonies and everything. You know, he's not William Wallace, you know.
But at the same time, you know, I can understand his perspective. He's looking out for his people.
Yeah,
That's
his
it.
own people. Yeah.
Open up these markets so that America can become the dominant hegemon at this time and take over these markets as a result of these new policies.
Okay.
May I interfere real quick?
Sure.
So like the FDR administration had a vitriolic relationship with the British government at that time before World War II. The FDR viewed the British government as potential enemies of the United States. They had plans drawn up for an invasion of the British homeland. They had active goals and objectives in order to take the United Kingdom down a notch. And, so I would say that the FDR was working in the best interests of the United States, but I do want to point out that the FDR administration was considered left-wing radical by the British government. So they were at direct odds with each other. So there was that too. And then after World War II, the Eisenhower administration, at the behest of what FDR wanted, demanded that the British give up their colonies. And again, Eisenhower pretty much actually, when the British invaded Egypt and the Sinai and the Port Said War and the Suez Canal War, Eisenhower said that the United States would use force against British if they didn't pull out. So
very good point.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
But going back to the parallels and the similarities and differences between the United States as a hegemon and how the UK acted as a hegemon, what other points come to your mind?
Yeah, definitely. So let's draw back to how the Hegemon Rival dialectic worked with Britain.
Okay.
And we can get into America. So just as a recap, hegemon being Britain,
right?
mercantile rivals being the settler colonies, right? The U.S., South Africa, Canada, etc.
Right.
And then the extractive peripheries, the real third world countries at the time, right? The same thing we can see now. The hegemon is the U.S. post-World War II, right? China has been the main mercantile rival of the U.S., right? And then there's still the extractive periphery, the third world countries, which export raw materials in exchange for the U.S. dollar. And this is where you see the contradiction come into play again, right? So China post-1971, under Deng Xiaoping's market reforms, right? They agree with the U.S. to produce goods in exchange for the U.S. dollar, right?
Okay.
China quickly industrializes, right? And most people at the time just thought, okay, China is just going to stay producing our buckets and nuts and bolts and whatever. They're not going to be able to produce high technology stuff. We're going to stay the hegemon. They're going to stay the rival. We're going to have this surplus of third world countries being the extractive periphery for us, where we can just get raw materials for dirt cheap, right?
Right.
This is where the contradiction comes back into play, right? The hegemon wants to stay the hegemon. It wants to maintain currency hegemony, with the US dollar being the dominant world reserve currency, right? But when you look at it, the US dollar is not like backed by anything, right? There's no gold standard that we're abiding by or anything. Right? So we're just able to maintain relative bouts of not super bad inflation, as opposed to other countries, right? You can even look at Forbes, for example, right? They posit the question, why can the US confidently just print money, right? But other countries cannot do the same, right? So the short answer is because the US dollar is the global reserve currency. In other words, most countries and companies from other countries usually need to transact business in US dollars. Exposed to the value of their currency relative to the US dollar.
Now, Habibi, you know that the U.S. The dollar went off the gold standard. I think it was 1971 or 72 under Nixon. What do you think about that decision?
So I think there's a lot of effects that come into play when you get off the gold standard, right? We are essentially just operating under the idea that I swear I had a dollar before. I guess it's gone. Inflation, right? That this dollar that I used to have is actually worth $1, and I can actually do stuff with it, like fiat currency, right? Because it's not backed by anything, we just have this faith in the system to proceed as it goes, right? But we can see this, and I'm going to get into this later as well, right? The hegemony, like consistently declining, right? You see the U.S. dollar as decreasing in relation to the amount of U.S. dollars, for example, that China used to have. So China being the number 2 rival, right? At one point, I believe in 2005. Let me actually look up the exact statistic here, so I can look it up for you.
While you're looking that up, so what you're saying is that the non-gold standard-backed U.S. dollar was the first cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Definitely.
China used to have about 65% of its foreign exchange reserves in the US dollar, right? Now it's less than 50. I don't have the exact figure offhand for you, but you can see it's steadily decreasing. And go ahead.
Because I was going to say that I was reading several prominent economists who are saying that the new game now is that countries like China, Russia, they are they're trying to decouple from the U.S. dollar, essentially going forward.
Yeah, and why would
I think that's the new game in town, basically, right? Mm-hmm. That's the new big game in town. I think Russia, China, I think even Iran, maybe Venezuela. I guess there's maybe some other countries that are.
I mean, these smaller countries
block,
make no difference if they remove themselves, like Venezuela.
But China and Russia are not small though.
No, but I'm talking about Venezuela and Iran specifically. They don't make make a difference.
So just quickly, the gates of war we're standing at is this main reason.
Right.
Yes, exactly, and I definitely wanted to get into that as well.
So real quick though, who are the countries that the current hegemony is taking resources from?
Who was born from IMF?
Yeah, true. IMF. You're right.
Yeah,
are there countries you can point to that we're taking
Pakistan?
raw material from?
Pakistan.
Raw material. Wait, hold on. What raw material are we taking from Pakistan?
It's not the raw material. It's the blood money. They don't need anything raw. The interest on the IMF loan.
No. So hold on. Let's just be clear. Let's have some clarification here. So the third world countries that the hegemony is using, they're taking raw material from that country.
No. See, for Pakistan, they don't want.
The IMF, it's Pakistan.
Yeah, because I'll tell you, IMF is the main
raw
source.
Material.
We have steel. We have
Besides
everything.
Bangla music.
No. Do you know what the? I'll send you the link.
I'm joking, guys.
You gotta.
You guys have plenty of tasty mangoes.
Oh, forget that. I'm just talking about the IMF. Singularly, the stipulations they put on the contract to renew your loan or to give you any more money, you will not build any energy. You will not build any infrastructure that helps your economy. When they put these stipulations, it's a direct way to control everything you do in that country. We can't export goods. because they said no. Pakistan right now has shut major industry down because the IMF won't allow it to have industry.
So then why is Pakistan taking loans from the IMF then?
Wait, Alex, let me clarify Saint's point. Saint, let me clarify.
Yeah.
So, Alex, I think what Saint is trying to say, and Habibi, you can also correct me as well, but basically the IMF it's like a coercive tool that's used by the United States and its allies to keep other countries in check. And what I mean by that is basically that if any country does not toe the U.S. line, they can put in stipulations through the IMF that just make it economically crippling. Essentially, I think that's
exactly what. Yeah, that's basically that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah,
that's my understanding of it.
That's a very good way to put it. So the same way that we modeled the Hegemon Rival dialectic as Britain essentially helping the U.S. to industrialize is the same thing that we saw with relation to U.S. and China, right? Post 1971, China quickly industrialized solely due to, or not solely due to, but primarily due to the export of capital from the U.S. to China. US deindustrializes, China industrializes, and now we have additional tensions that come into play. And remember when I mentioned in the beginning that imperialism consisted of the hegemon trying to maintain the value of its currency, etc., by any means necessary. We can get into the by any means necessary, specifically with the IMF, right?
Yeah,
What's ironic about the IMF is that the same way that the wealth was plundered from India, right, exported from Britain to the U.S., right, the U.S. being the superpower that is today, a large part because it was able to industrialize because of this capital, it takes this same wealth, the form of the IMF, right, to Saint's point earlier, right, brings it back to Pakistan, which was like India at the time, right? It brings it back to Pakistan, its own wealth, right? And it says, here, we'll give you this loan of $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever $1 billion, right? With X amount of stipulations, all of the stipulations that Saint mentioned. Here are the economic policies that you need to conduct. Here is like this narrow range of things that you're allowed to do with this money. But really, this was the same money that we had 200 years prior. You know what I mean?
Right.
So who are the? Can you give me some examples of countries that the hegemony is taking resources from?
Yeah, you can look at Africa specifically. So, for example, let's look at like 2011 Libya, right? Let's look at the petrodollar, which Saint mentioned earlier as well. Then we can get into like Africa in particular. So the U.S. historically has convinced oil-producing countries to, price their oil in accordance to the U.S. dollar, right? This is what we know as like the petrodollar. Why is this important? Obviously every country needs to, import oil so they can, maintain the energy that goes into the country and, power, various processes within their economy. Essentially, they need to then maintain their exchange rate with the U.S. dollar, right? In order to do this, a large part of this is exporting goods to the U.S. in order to earn U.S. dollars so then they can maintain this exchange rate and import this oil, right? Countries that try to subvert this petrodollar system or this model, I mean, we've seen the effects, right? Libya under Gaddafi in 2011, he tried to go outside of this petrodollar model, right? He tried to introduce the gold dinar currency. And I know a lot of us love WikiLeaks, right? We love going to WikiLeaks and citing big atrocities, terrible things that happened, Iraq war crimes, right? But there's a lot of things that you can read into WikiLeaks about too, with relation to Libya. I can give you a direct example. France was pushing for invading Libya in 2011 because they wanted to, quote unquote, gain a greater share of Libyan oil production and to prevent Gaddafi from establishing a rival currency called the gold dinar. Right? So this creation of this petrodollar allows the U.S. to maintain their currency hegemony, right? Because every country is importing oil. They need to buy U.S. dollars in order to, import oil. And that is like one specific country, Libya, that has been just decimated by this imperialist policies. Other African countries, you can look at. Which was the African country? This was in the news.
The diamonds. Diamonds.
Tanzania.
Yeah, diamonds. Yeah, it started with. I can't remember the name of the country, but there was a lot of memes being like, "Oh, we gotta liberate them now." It's become so accepted in our society that people create memes for it, and like even various political people can be like, "Oh, that's funny," because in their head it makes sense.
Do you remember
I also,
movie called Blood Diamonds? Real old one.
Blood
Yeah,
Diamond.
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
that
Yeah,
was a
Blood
good
Diamond.
movie.
Yeah.
So I also want to point out that some of this stuff doesn't come from a vacuum. There's like a historical precedent for it, right? So, for example, um, why is the dollar the standard currency for oil trade, right? So, who was the number one producer of oil in the world during World War II?
Saudi Arabia,
The United States.
United States,
Yeah.
Canada.
So, the United States, right? So, after World War II, a few years after World War II, Eisenhower went to Saudi Arabia, right? And they made a deal with each other and basically said, we're going to give you the infrastructure and the know-how how to pump your oil, and in turn you're going to send us the oil to us at a price. So there has to be a standard rate for oil. Okay, so later on, in later years, it was agreed upon that it would be the U.S. dollar. U.S. dollar would be the standard price for oil. So this is how it's pegged. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is that our rival state China. So why did the United States go to China to be our rival state, to do our manufacturing, our small manufacturing goods, right? The desire to expand U.S. influence into the Pacific, into China, goes way
Good point.
back
Very good point.
to the 1800s, right? To the 1800s, it was a foreign policy goal of the United States to make China their rival state, that China would manufacture or produce goods for us and give it back to us. This was a policy consideration from almost when we took over California in the Mexican-American War. So it just didn't come out of nowhere. This is long-standing policy. Also, countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Kuwait, et cetera, the oil-producing countries, like, I almost feel like you're saying they don't benefit from selling oil. Like, they benefit greatly from selling oil.
They can't get out of line, though. They cannot get out of line.
Well, look at
thing.
Saudi Arabia now. Look at Saudi Arabia now, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Biden called Saudi Arabia. They didn't even answer his phone call.
No.
Well,
I think Habibi's making a different point, though.
Yeah.
I
What's
think
the
Alex.
point?
I think we're talking more about the role of the hegemon and how it stays a hegemon
Right.
and how it wants and what it wants to do. I think you're getting more into like political dynamics.
Like if I'll tell you, like the countries do benefit. There is a benefit, but it's not a full spectrum of benefit. It's limited.
I mean, look at the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and how much they've built. I mean, this hegemony with the Middle Eastern countries is just from the 1940s. Like, it's less than 100 years, and look how much they've. If you look at pictures of Jeddah in 1940, and you look at pictures of Jeddah now, it might as well be you're looking at pictures from 1200.
But let me, Habibi, let me ask you this though. So going forward, because I don't want us to get sidetracked because
I don't think I'm taking us on a sidetrack. What I'm trying to say.
I think you are though.
No, hold on. What I'm trying to say is.
All right. So the Middle East benefited.
Hold on. One hand affects the other.
Of course.
Right? Like, so politics and relationships and past history affects the hegemony and what the hegemony is.
Of course.
It's not in a bubble. So we can't have that discussion about hegemony and its effects without bringing in politics.
Yeah, sure. But how much time do you have to talk tonight then?
All right, go ahead.
I mean, if you want to talk,
yeah, no, that's fair.
No, you want to spend 3 hours, man?
No,
let's do
fair.
it then.
That's
no, okay, man. All right. Sorry, Habibi. So, I think where we're going with this is that, like, going forward, like, the U.S. obviously, like, and we've discussed this. Each country is going to act in its own interest. There's nothing wrong with that. No one is saying that. Yeah. I think going forward, where do you see this going? Like, do you see the hegemony lasting, or do you think there's like what do you think is going to happen?
Historically, we've never seen hegemonies last, and we are seeing hegemony on the decline. That's what's an interesting question, right? In this period of capitalism, I guess, stemming from the 16th century, I believe, right? And Britain being the main hegemon, and the U.S. being, the current hegemon. You see two main hegemons appearing, right? Both imperialist, capitalist countries. see the main mercantile rival now being China, which is trying to delve away from the flavor of capitalism that is at play, within the past few hundred years. There's so many ways you can analyze China's economics. That's probably like 5 podcast discussions if you really want to do it, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say, right? We've generally seen China, especially with relation to other extractive peripheries countries like Pakistan, for example, operate in more like quid pro quo agreements, right? Like more win-win agreements, right? As opposed to, especially when you posit it against like British rule or against how the U.S. has historically treated their extractive peripheries. So it's really hard to say like how this is going to play out. Obviously, I think what is the most pressing detail around all this is that the U.S. Has this, immense military power, right? And many people can see this hegemony declining, right? And you can also see this like manufactured consent around an impending war, right? Especially within the past like decade or so. A lot of people you talk to, whether it's they're liberals, conservatives, etc., you're going to see this accusation of China being like this imperialist country because there's XYZ, whatever, because that relates again back to the old definition of imperialism, which was the export of capital. And obviously, China is the #1 exporter of capital, in 2022. So to label another country as imperialist is no like small thing, right? It's a very, especially when you talk about 2 major superpowers, the U.S. and China. The last thing that anyone wants to see is a giant war breakout between superpowers like that. So I think that's the most pressing detail. It's hard to say what's going to happen after this hegemony declines, and in all likelihood, China is the dominator of the world reserve currency, et cetera, et cetera. We can only just hope and try to spread awareness that war is bad.
War is bad.
Yeah,
don't do war.
You want to do that while you have a 1-ton container, 10 feet dug under the ground, and you're sitting in it. That's when you can say it.
Exactly.
But now, Habibi, for the listeners and viewers, like, what should they pay attention to? Like, when they're like, let's say they're skimming over the news and this and that. Like, what sort of signals should they pay attention to?
Yeah, definitely.
Further their understanding and enrich their knowledge.
I think one of the most interesting parts of all this, with relation to imperialism and specifically the maintenance of currency hegemony, is the creation of political instability. So you can see historically political instability leading to the dominant hegemon of currency being strengthened. What do I mean by that, right? Because it has hegemonic currency, it's in the U.S.'s best interest to provoke instability throughout the world. For example, Syria, Libya, et cetera, just various countries in the middle.
And other places. Okay.
Exactly, everywhere, right? Because instability in the world creates like a sudden rush to buy U.S. dollars, right? In times of instability, countries want some semblance of stability, right? The U.S. dollar is the dominant form of currency.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
I think it's a very interesting point, right? Because you want to be able to purchase goods, services, et cetera, with something that's going to work. The U.S. dollar right now is guaranteed to work. I can buy whatever goods with this exchange rate in periods of instability. What's very unique about today's situation, right, with regards to the Russia-Ukraine war, right, is usually the U.S. is benefiting from destabilizing a region, right, which would usually result in the export of inflation, right? The U.S. wouldn't really deal with inflation, like messed with Iraq, et cetera, right? But we're seeing inflation happening now, right? The U.S. dollar is not being strengthened now under this Russia-Ukraine war. And why is that? So I'm sure we all know, especially with regards to like Pakistan and whatnot, that the U.S. has sanctioned Russia and has also called upon India and Pakistan to specifically condemn Russia, right? To also hey, we condemn your war, et cetera, we want to also impose sanctions on you. We will refuse to buy oil from you, right? So Russia is currently sanctioned, but India is like, wait, no, we still need oil, right? And we can get oil from Russia.
In rubles, too. No. Actually, Russia accepted their rupees. Yeah, they paid in rupees, Yeah,
and they're also conducting trade in rubles now, too.
In rubles,
So Russia is like, hey, now we're sanctioned, like our US dollar is like useless. Like, hey, if you want to buy oil from us, you guys need oil, right? Buy it in rubles, right? And now that's also resulting in the weakening of the US dollar, right? These are, you can look at this as like an anti-imperialist moment in time where people are buying oil in rubles, which is like weakening the hegemonic currency, which is the US dollar.
Yep.
And that's why we're seeing news articles about the U.S. dollar gaining against the euro. It's propaganda / the euros being hammered by all the Ukraine-Russia war.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and this isn't just stuff like you're like making like elementary sort of notions against like current geopolitical events, right? I can point to George Friedman, right? This is a guy who's the founder of a think tank called Stratfor, right? It's a very important U.S. think tank. This publication called Barron's called it the quote unquote shadow CIA, which makes it sound really cool, obviously. Right? He says, quote unquote, to maintain Eurasian balance of power is and will remain the driving force of U.S. foreign policy throughout the 21st century. He says that in his book, The Next 100 Years. In addition to that, in 1948, George Kennan says, George Kennan, who's a very important political figure, he was the U.S. Director of Policy Planning under Harry S. Truman. He says, quote unquote, we have about 50% of the world's wealth, we meaning the U.S., right? Only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern to maintain this position of disparity. Can't get any clearer than that, right? The Director of Policy Planning is specifically saying we need to maintain this unequal development between countries and maintain our hegemony.
There we go.
Wasn't George Kennan, Habibi, I could be wrong, wasn't he also the guy who talked about the grand arena concept after World War II? Where they divided different regions based on their functions?
I'm not sure about that. Anyone?
Oh, okay. Okay. But anyways, and that's just a trivia.
Basically,
I could be wrong.
Basically, that concept talks about the divvying up of certain countries from which how they're going to regions they were trying to invade or have dominion over, how they will harvest. Let's just put that from there.
So let's go through a fortune telling experiment real quick, right? Let's say China becomes the hegemony. Who are China's rival states, and who are they extracting wealth from?
I know India is.
That's a very good thought experiment.
Yeah,
that's a very good thought experiment.
So what do you think?
So let's try to focus on where is China exporting capital currently, right?
Right.
So China exports capital a lot to Africa, right? And this is where a lot of this U.S. propaganda pieces come in, where they're like, China is taking over Africa. It's a giant imperialist country, blah, 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 blah. So I think you're seeing the rise of Africa, but it's hard to say that what is going to be the mercantile rival with relation to China, right? We need to really understand how the U.S. is going to the drop off from U.S. hegemony into China hegemony will really decide the fate of
I think that model is completely different with China, because China, what they do is even though they've been putting industry in Africa, it's the Chinese workers working there.
It's win-win situation.
So it's taking. Well, China does have a huge population, so they're not running out of people anytime soon. So
I think China's
because
Sorry,
because if you're going to compare the United States back in the day, putting the money in China and industrializing it, they weren't sending U.S. people over there to work in the industry they're creating. That's different in Africa. What China is building there, they got their own people working there. It's a whole different ball game. What they're doing is they're buying or leasing land and giving out loans. They're doing their thing. If the country doesn't pay, they take it. It's a whole different way. It's a whole different way of ball game, literally.
I think China's natural rival in that region would be India.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be India. And you can see that the United States. That's one reason why they have more favorable relations with India is to buffer against.
I think that
against China, against Chinese.
That definitely makes it
expansion.
obvious.
So, I mean, like this topic is super interesting.
Oh, it's condensed, man.
I wish we had more. We're definitely gonna have you on again, man.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would love to be on again. This is so fun.
Oh yeah. And don't mind the back and forth, man. We just gotta argue.
You know,
about it.
brown people, their temperatures go up pretty fast.
Especially when you mention cricket or mangoes, bro. It's on. So.
No, that distracts us, dude.
All right, so let's do crystal ball. We'll start with Riz K. Riz K, what do you think?
I think this is the second show in a row where we sort of talked about this topic.
Yeah.
In one way or the other, and it seems that like we're sort of building a consensus that we're seeing a transition period in the world right now.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you're seeing the decline of power, within the United States and rise of powers in other blocs, particularly with China, Russia, and their allies. What this means for the person living in the United States going forward, it's very unclear at this time. Obviously, there's a lot of variables, a lot of things can change. I would say, though, I guess the main concern that I would have is that when you lived in a country or you've been in a country of enormous wealth for so long, and then your status sort of declines, I don't think people handle it that well. So it's kind of like the analogy, like let's say you were living in a $5 million house in Beverly Hills, and then you had to move to like Compton condo with like you know what I mean?
No, you have to move to Florida Stark.
Stark.
I mean, okay. I mean that might be Stark.
That's dude.
Florida,
if you want to put in perspective, Beverly Hills to Florida Stark. That's the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, but maybe my example is a bit too extreme. But I guess the general gist is that I don't think that the people in this country or the policymakers are preparing the people in this country that well, to be honest.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of internal chaos that you see in this country, unfortunately, you may see an increase of that going forward.
Yeah, they don't want you to think.
As the economic status declines, and I think if the dollar ever does not become the world's reserve currency, then I think that it's just going to be, I don't know, it's going to be pretty bad, I think.
Yep.
Anyways.
I got you. I'll go next. Man, there's a lot to unpack here. And like when Habibi, when you first introduced the topic, you said that some of these ideas came from Lenin, and like for somebody who's listening like casually, like you say Lenin, and all of a sudden red flags get thrown up, right? So
Oh no.
So the thing is that the red flags in my head went up. Literally, communist red flags went up in my head. Like, what the hell? What this guy's talking about, right? But the more I listen to you, the more it says, okay, like what you're saying makes sense, and I've heard this before, right? So, and even in our own lifetime, we've seen this play out, right? Policymakers in the United States have moved industry to Mexico in order to cheapen the goods that have been shipped, right? They've moved it to China, they've moved it to Mexico, and all of a sudden we're in the situation where we don't make anything anymore. Like, again, this is like just like Riz K said, this is the second show we've been talking about a similar topic. I think this format is the format we should be using going forward, narrowing it down and talking about a specific topic, and maybe throwing in some arrows here and there trying to tie it in. So like China pushing capital to Africa and building small manufacturing over there and sending Chinese workers to work in those plants is for sure something they're doing. So, you mentioned win-win. There's no win-win in that, man. It's, China, and just like Saint said, China's giving loans in order to build infrastructure. If you can't pay it, now they own that territory. They own ports now, right? So they're doing this for their best interest, and they're handing out loans and building unneeded infrastructure that they know those countries won't be able to pay back. Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah, they own all the ports right now.
Sri Lanka, right? So like,
I think in relation to Sri Lanka, I think that's an important point. I think when you look at how the debt structure was structured, for Sri Lanka, I believe China's role in that was about 9%. I believe other countries, with relation to like the world, the bank system within Asia, was a significantly higher portion. I think Japan even had a higher portion than China as well. So I think it's I think that also becomes like a propaganda piece in the West where they're like, oh, Sri Lanka collapsed because of China. But if you look into why,
it was a mix of issues.
The only thing the Chinese invested was in the shipping ports.
Yeah, and now they own the shipping ports.
Yep.
So, I mean, but that's fair. What you're saying is fair. And just to prove that the moving forward it's going to be the century of Africa, is the European countries are starting to send billions and trillions of dollars into sub-Saharan Africa in order to pull these resources out and have them manufactured and send them up to Europe. And the North African countries have been getting loans heavily from the IMF to build highways, to build ports, to build rail systems in order to bring those goods up from Central Africa to North Africa, do some small manufacturing or building on the site, and then shipping it to Europe. So that's proof right there of what's happening. Also, like, we have to look at it from a perspective of, 50 years is a small drop in the bucket of like geopolitical behaviors in history. So right now the U.S. is trying to use Japan, Australia, and India to like hedge China. So, I mean, like, moving forward, who knows what's going to happen? This war in Ukraine between Russia is changing things so rapidly and dynamically. It's almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah. And I'm not a defender of him. I am not a defender of him. But who said that this was a mistake? Uncle Trump.
Uncle Trump.
Mamu Trump.
No, so, I told you. I told you.
I mean, listen, a broken clock is wrong twice a day, and a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So, but he said it. You know what I'm saying? So,
I don't know, man. Every time you say that, that's kind of like saying, like, well, I'm not a racist.
You know what? You know what?
Come on, man.
At this point, where I said that on the last show. Forget all the craziness about him, but he was really buffering the worst things that the United States could have done outside these borders. So, at this point, really, if he runs again, I'm going to vote for him.
He's going to win now, dude. He's got your endorsement. How can he lose? Everybody, you heard it. You heard it here first on the Somewhat Podcast, man. Saint, the living legend, has endorsed Trump.
10:13 p.m.
Trump 2024, baby.
That's right. All right, Saint, what's your opinion?
I just said it. Trump 2024.
You just said it. Habibi, let Habibi finish.
I can't endorse Trump here, guys. I'm sorry.
All you got to do is put headphones on and listen to something else while he's on. Then it's all good.
I'm with Habibi on this one, but anyways, let Habibi finish since he's our special guest.
Yeah, that's all. I just wanted to wrap it up there. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on imperialism. I guess before we spoke about this today, with regards to specific economic policies, like anything in particular you had questions about, or anything that maybe like might have changed in your mind, or maybe like strengthened in your mind based on the discussion that we had today.
No, I think pretty much I'm in line with the line of thought you had. I mean, that paper the link you shared, I'm definitely going to give it a read. But we are thinking along the same lines about how economic different ways are used by imperialism to maintain hegemony. So I pretty much agreed with everything you said.
I did. Your talk was definitely illuminating, especially like how you linked in the sort of the transfer of wealth, like that.
Yeah, that was a pretty good way.
Britain got from India and then transferred that to its colony states, and how what that dynamic is. That was illuminating for me. I had not thought of that angle of it before. I guess the only thing, the only other question I will have is that, there's a lot of people who like also believe in conspiracy theories, right? In the sense that there's like this cabal of, like, I don't know, lizard people or whatever. That
Who doesn't believe in lizard people, guys? Come on.
But I just want to hear from you, because you're an academic type of person who's done research in this topic. Like, maybe, like, do you think that there's any element of truth to, like, a new world order type conspiracy theory that's pulling the strings, or do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know.
I think there's a good quote. I believe there was the economist's name was Michael Parenti, and he went on to say that everyone can believe, like, a group of farmers can organize, right? Farmers from here can organize and have, like, similar thinking and discuss ideas, and laborers over here can organize and discuss ideas and what their best interests are. As soon as you say that rich people have organized before, you're labeled as, like, a conspiracy theorist. They're rich, man. They have all the resources out there. They're talking to each other, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, it's been shown in the past that they've done it. Like J.P. Morgan.
WikiLeaks.
There's a precedent of them organizing and discussing what economic principles, what economic steps need to happen in order to benefit themselves.
There's a really good paper there's a declassified CIA paper that you can read about specifically how the U.S. wanted to starve Cuba. This was back when this was after the Cuban Revolution, right? They mentioned that Castro had an approval rate of, like, above 50% among the Cuban population, right? And the CIA paper, which is declassified now, you can go read on the CIA.gov website, right? It goes on to say that it is our imperative that we need to starve these Cuban people, right, through brutal sanctions and whatnot, to create political instability, so that we can once again regain Cuba as another, like, territorial ally when it was, like, in the Batista regime prior.
No. I definitely agree with those. I don't think I'm talking about those type of conspiracy theories. I'm talking about more along the lines of, like the one world government type,
New World Order.
That level. Which is
I think right now the New World Order, the New World Order is kind of, it's not too sure about where they're going, because some of their game plans hasn't worked out well. That's where we're at. We're at a crossroads.
Dude, every time I hear the New World Order, I don't know if you guys are wrestling fans. There was like
let me tell you something, brother.
You remember that scene?
New World Order is here.
It was Hulk Hogan, what was his name? Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. I think they were part of the New World Order.
Mm-hmm. It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing. Those rich guys are giving themselves fancy names. Here we're saying New World Order. Old Bush said that. He's the first one to say it.
Also said nuclear. Nuclear.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up. I do think that Habibi, you're going to be on for
sure. Yeah, because this topic has a lot of mass. Yeah. It has a lot of mass.
For sure.
Thank you for coming on. Today's podcast was brought to you by Khalas Energy Drink. One drink and Khalas. Stay fresh, Lota. Stay fresh, Lota. Stay fresh. And the Big Brown Deck Barbecue in Brantford, Florida. Come on down and eat's good. All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
And also, don't forget to like. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment.
Oh yeah.
spread the love, not the hate. Spread the love.
All right.
Take care.